Welcome to Knowledge as We See It, the show where we explore what engagement means to us in the workplace. I'm your host, Daniel Nathan. In this episode, I'll be joined by Hannah Ajikawo, practice lead at Scaled Consulting and founder of Growth Mode. Drawing on 13 years of experience in the sales industry, Hannah will share her expertise on the best ways to set up your salespeople for success in the current economic climate. Hannah, it's great to have you on Knowledge as We See It. Thank you so much for joining the podcast.
No, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. I'm glad that you consider me to have some words that are worth listening to. So I'm happy to be here.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Could you start off by telling us a little bit of the work that you've been doing at Scaled and Growth Mode?
Yeah, sure. So I'll roll it back a little bit. So I in my role as I guess from when I started doing more player coach and leadership roles about, let's just say 6-7 years ago, I started doing consulting on the side. It was by accident. And what I loved about consulting was you sat outside an organization. You had a more impartial viewpoint as to what was going on. You weren't entwined in any of the politics that were going on inside the organization, and people really leaned on you for your expertise and perspective. And I found that in those spaces, I seemed to have the biggest impact. So as I transitioned out of being just kind of in working for one company, I started to do a bit more consulting through Growth Mode, working with very, very early stage technology companies, predominantly SaaS companies who were, to be fair, still establishing product market fit. Recognized very quickly that's not my sweet spot. I come in and create big impact when there is product market fit and companies are looking at creating much more repeatability inside their organization so they can scale. So all of that led me to Scaled. I was on at a time when Clubhouse was the thing. I was in Clubhouse. I was running a room called Stop Fucking Firing Salespeople. Sorry about the explicits there, but that's what it was called.
Salespeople isn't a swear word.
Oh, there we go. Right. So Stop Firing Salespeople. And the CEO of Scaled came in and was like, this looks interesting. And then said, hey, we've got some projects that I think you'd be great on. Come and join us. And then we ran into the meadow and lived happily ever after. So yeah, I've been working with a organization since then to help really build out enablement, sales teams, go-to-market strategy, and it's been exciting.
What was Stop Firing Salespeople? Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so the scenario that I used to paint at the beginning was if you went 2 quarters and you hadn't hit your number and you couldn't fire salespeople, because that's often what happens. Let's just get rid of some of the team. What else would you do? And it started to invite sales leaders into that conversation where they were like, this is good because we don't, like, a lot of the time, well, half of them didn't want to fire salespeople. Half of them were like, yeah, but you just get, it's the C performers, get them out. But what it did is it got everyone to think about what else could we look at? Where else could we lean into the organization? What systems could we look at? What data could we look at? How do we look inwards to figure out why we are missing our number? And it was a really interesting conversation. So that's really what I was trying to think about. And it surfaced from me being in situations where early on in my career, when the numbers weren't there and being told like, listen, it's not really working out. And the first time it happens, it really hurts. And then it happens again and you're like, okay, this is just what companies do.
Yeah, I suppose this is all part of the stigma attached. This is the world of sales and how it operates.
It is.
As we've entered into 2023, we, of course, find ourselves in a very uncertain time, economically speaking. Some are predicting recession, global recession. What does that mean for sales teams? And what are sort of new challenges that salespeople and sales leaders, sales trainers are facing today?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So what I find, one thing I've been speaking with sales teams about and sales leaders is, there's a lot more people. So we've seen a trend of more people coming into decision-making units when it comes to buying and onboarding new tools, services, solutions. Now, what we're seeing now is the decision-making unit changing. So the person who led and drove the initial discussions may not be there halfway through the sales engagement, halfway through the sales cycle. So multi-threading is really a thing. I know it's like this fancy word like multi-threading, but essentially having as many connections as possible. Think of like Spider-Man, right? When he casts his web and it's just like, right? Like you need everything to stick. You need to go and make sure that captures a lot of people inside the organization, because as things shift,
Yeah.
as people shift in and out, the goal is still pretty much the same at an organization. So that the more you spread yourself across an organization. Now, just remember, this is not just the sales individual. We're talking about the entire customer facing team, right? This is through the product or whatever you're doing through, if you're doing a PLG motion, this is through your senior executives, this is through whatever you can leverage marketing. The closer you get to the organization and their goals and their critical priorities, the easier it is going to be for you to continue discussions as things are moving around and uncertain and people are leaving and people are not completely engaged. So I think that's one of the things that come up and stick out the most for me when it comes to just like in our day-to-day things that we're doing with throughout the sales engagement. What's that? What changes the most? And it's becoming more compelling now, that multi-threading piece.
Multi-threading. You know, I've not heard that before, but what you say makes absolute sense. As you say, with decision making, with the ground shifting around us all the time, employee turnover is possibly higher than ever. As you say, you know, a sales team can start an engagement or start a communication with one individual, hoping to close that contract, right, during that sales cycle. That individual, the client or the prospect leaves, and they've got to, as you say, they've got to try to bring in as much of the organization as possible to maintain that that cadence, right? That sales cadence. That's really, without giving too much away of your business and the strategy you offer. How can people try to overcome that challenge? What can they do? You're talking about multi-threading approach and bringing as many people into the sales conversation as possible. What kind of advice would you give to a sales team or sales leaders to try to, as I say, overcome that obstacle?
Drop your ego. This whole I need to be the superhero, I need to be the one that saves the day, it's just not going to work. Cross-functional alignment has to be the norm. You can't be against marketing. You can't be talking behind the revenue operations person's back. You can't be slating customer success. You can't be blaming it on the BDRs or the SDRs and saying it's because they're not doing pipe coverage. You have to be creating a cohesive go-to-market strategy that brings every single person into the fold. It's tied to a unified goal, and everybody has really clear expectations on what they need to put in to make everything work. So I think I put a status up on LinkedIn saying something about it's great to have a go-to-market strategy, but it needs to get to market. So people spend a lot of time planning, just lots of planning and figuring out stuff, still in silos, even companies that may only have 20 people. But it doesn't get going. Like the strategy doesn't get to market. You don't actually do the things that you're supposed to do. And that's because people are still figuring, oh, you know, we have to get everything 100% right and 80% and go. Like, so that's not giving away too much, but it's essentially sharing the fundamentals, and they're missing a lot of the time.
So actually that leads me on to my next question. If you can expand a little bit, how can sales managers, sales leaders adapt their strategy and their even their pitch or to succeed in 2023? What practical changes do they need to make?
I think they need to challenge the organization a bit. And sometimes we have to be like mini entrepreneurs inside our go-to-market teams to say, I've got an idea. Let me stress test it a little bit, and then I'm going to go back to the broader organization and say, hey, this is what I really think we should be doing. It's going against the grain, but it will create results. And a good example of this is I was speaking with a sales leader for a very big software company that everybody would know if I mentioned the name. And he said, we had a great last quarter after a really slow Q3, which is what most companies experienced last year. I said, what did you do differently? Which you can say is responsible for those results. What I loved is that he knew what he did. That's the first thing. So a lot of people don't actually know what they're doing. They're like, I don't know, we had a good quarter. He said, we recognized that the decision-making unit, so back to what I was talking about, has changed. More specifically, because of the uncertainty, CFOs are being brought into the mix more. So they are they are involved in the decision making, and they really want to see ROI, and it has to make sense. So we created we started to bring them into deals earlier, and we started to enable our team to have conversations with them. Shifted the dial completely for them. So when it comes back to your question, what do sales leaders, etc., need to do is be comfortable challenging the go-to-market that is actually in motion. It has to be agile. You can't have something that you put in place last September and you're like, we just got to see it through. But the only way you can do that is by making sure that you're actually measuring and have really key results that are tied back to that strategy, because then you can see with the measurements that we have in place, the things that we are using to indicate if it's working or not. Are they trending in the right direction? If not, you're granting yourself permission to challenge it. Sometimes people don't bake that in. They don't bake contingency planning into their go-to-market, which is okay. But at least be measuring something so you can say, all right, whilst we didn't have a plan B, it's time to think of a plan B. Who's coming up with examples? No idea is a stupid idea. And I don't see many, sometimes there's not, culturally, that's not what companies allow for. But I'd love to see more people breaking the rules. I encourage salespeople to break the rules all the time. Their sales managers don't know that, but I tell them to break the rules.
And if any profile is likely to break the rules, it's usually the salespeople, right? And I'm talking from a customer success head.
Yeah, exactly.
So absolutely. You mentioned you alluded to a few moments ago. Very briefly, you mentioned the role of BDRs, business development reps, and possibly SDRs. Can we talk a little bit about prospecting and how the potential recession or certainly the economic climate has affected prospecting? What are the keys to success in terms of prospecting?
Yeah, I mean, from a logistics and practical perspective, of course, one of the biggest challenges which companies are overcoming now was we just couldn't reach people.
Yeah.
Emails became really saturated. I think we were sending, I don't know what the exact stats off the top of my head, but we were sending maybe like 300% more and 40% less were being opened. So it just wasn't making any sense. It's something like that. It's more, but less is being opened. Don't quote me on that. And then we struggled. The other battle was, okay, so people are at home. How do I get in contact with them on the phone? So there was a data issue. The main and major data providers have worked really hard to help counteract that. So there's a lot of cell numbers, there's a lot of redirects and stuff like that. So that was the first issue. How do I reach people? So then a lot of companies had to start leaning into social selling. Okay, people are on LinkedIn a lot. People are trying to figure out what's going on and trying to expand their network. So how do we put our prospecting hats on in those spaces? So some of the big shifts is actually getting helping your teams get really creative, but still being able to measure that they're being as productive as we need them to be. So it's like we can't track everything, so there's this big trust thing. We're hiring a lot of people into SDR and BDR roles that have never been in front of each other. So most BDRs and SDRs, or let's just say XDRs, they started the first year of their role remote. They spent 1 year plus not really seeing their employees, not meeting their managers, not having that energy that we all love, particularly early on in our career. So that was a big shift for, I think, a lot of leaders to figure out, how do I keep them engaged? How do I trust people? They've just started. Are they just on Netflix? I don't know. And it was a really uncomfortable place. So yeah, the prospecting thing was, I think, probably quite slow for a lot of organizations for a few months. It was tough, and a lot of people on the receiving end was like, I didn't feel like I can buy anything because I don't know what's going on.
You know, you mentioned a very good point there. I didn't consider this about, and I love your term of using the term XDR.
Yeah.
And you mentioned how a lot of them have, they start their sales career as SDRs, BDRs, XDRs in a remote environment, as you know, the last few years has led to that. With that, has sales culture changed within organizations because of this remote working or hybrid working element? And if so, what can companies do to really build solid culture of sales inside an organization?
I think it's the question that everybody's asking themselves, probably quarter to quarter.
Yeah.
I don't think I have all the answers. I think one of the um, one of the things that stands out for me is one of the first things that leaders have to do, and they're still struggling a lot, is get comfortable extending trust.
Right.
You, if you do not trust your team, you're going to send yourself crazy
Yeah.
in this remote world. You literally have to trust people and give them space to make a few mistakes in order to allow them to be more self-sufficient. Because when I'm working with sales leaders, I always say one of the challenges we have the most is we never have enough time. We're being dragged everywhere, but we put ourselves in spaces that sometimes we don't need to be in because we don't extend enough trust and we don't establish a culture of trust, which is let me show and exhibit the behaviors that show that actually I'm doing stuff. I'm self-sufficient. I'm allowing you to be self-sufficient. I'm saying when I'm doing something wrong. It's okay if I make mistakes. I'm holding myself accountable. Giving them permission to set their own schedule. Just some of that stuff. What happens is we just become attached to everything, and we're too busy, and we burn out as sales leaders. So, culturally, there's been this shift in trust, big time, and also trying to figure out how do I get people to be self-motivated. How do I dig into what actually drives them and what motivates them? Because I no longer can be behind them with a stick. I can't come into the office and say it's too quiet on the sales floor, make some noise. So I think a lot of companies have been trying to invest in technology or get creative with shared Zooms or shared virtual spaces where they do like a virtual boiler room, whatever it is, to try and get people to still feel like they can create that environment that is still hungry, energetic, and where you can start feeding off of other people. But it's tough. It's not easy, and you do have to keep getting creative because people are like, "Oh, we did this last week. This is boring."
You know what? That's really interesting, and actually, we're going to maybe ask you to expand a little bit on motivation, which I think motivation in the workplace, you can extend far beyond the just the sales business unit. It really does apply to every department, every unit within the company. You mentioned how sales leaders now need to do a better job in terms of motivating their teams, particularly, everyone's stretched all around the world, and as often is the case. So, and you mentioned things like Zooms and boiler rooms. So let's talk a little bit about what you think sales leaders can do to better motivate their teams.
So it's crazy, but I can't remember where the research is from, but it's like, if you show that you care, that just literally just showing that you care and creating a culture where you have trust can help improve performance by like 700%. There was some crazy study. If I find it, I'll send it to you. But motivation's an interesting one because people talk about external motivators and internal, or intrinsic and extrinsic, right? So if you look at things like Hertzberg theory around motivation, and essentially intrinsic motivation is talking about what really drives me, what excites me, what gets me out of bed. That's probably the best thing, without money, without rewards, without external congratulations and pats on the back. And then external stuff really talks about it's what we call hygiene factors. So what that is it's not just, hey, here's your salary and here's your bonus, that should drive you. It's, are you being paid enough? So I could be really intrinsically motivated, but if I don't have the working conditions that's going to allow me to do great things, then I'm still not going to want to get out of bed, because I know that I'm being underpaid. I know that when I log in, my internet is crap. I know that when I start working with clients, they're going to ask me for tools and resources, and prospects are going to ask me for one pages and we don't have them. I know our legal processes are so long. I know we're inflexible. So all of those things can demotivate someone. So that's one side of it. Understanding how well you are as a sales leader doing with the external factors, or extrinsic and then the intrinsic. The other side is, as a sales leader, am I creating a space where people feel comfortable sharing their intrinsic motivations? I know that I've worked for leaders, and I'm not telling you crap. I do not trust you with the information I'm about to share with you. So am I creating a space where people feel like they can share, their deepest, darkest, deepest, lightest desires with me, where they can share that, I came from this dark place and that's why I fight so hard to change what my outcomes can look like for me and maybe those after me. No. So as leaders, we have to look internally and say, are we consistent in some of the ways in which we're showing up, where people do feel like, you know what, this is a psychologically safe space for me to share things. And on my down days, my leader gets it. And the leader says, you know what, we've already had that conversation. I get it. I'm not going to be at you because I know tomorrow you're going to show up and you're going to smash it. We don't do that very well. Why? Because we're still scared and we don't trust people. And we're like, oh my God, if I haven't called every XDR today to see what they're doing, I don't think they're going to be doing the work. And then what's worse is the leaders on top are putting that pressure down on the sales leader. Like, what are they doing? What are they doing? 10 huddles a day. It's too much. It's way too much, Daniel. And that's what's happening with this remote world.
Wow, that's fascinating. So, yeah, I mean, trust really does go a long way. And I think you can really, you can't underestimate the value that trust can bring to an organization. As you say, trust comes from the very top and it feeds its way down. You mentioned something a few moments ago regarding employees feeling demotivated by not having something as basic as sales collateral around them. They feel that they need that support, that collateral, that enablement support, if you like. On the subject of sales collateral, you did mention one pages. What kind of collateral, maybe besides one pages, can really support a sales team with their goals?
So I flip it on its head, and I think every single thing that we do when it comes to sales just comes down to getting closely aligned to a customer engagement process, or a customer journey, because that will give you all the answers. Understanding how your prospects interact with you, from a non-face-to-face perspective. So I'd say before you actually have any sales contact. So maybe digitally, how they're interacting with stuff in your digital spaces, through to what happens and the things that they need to do once they engage with you. We'll tell you exactly what you need in order to help them do that. So if we shift our mindset to if we shift our mindset away from what is the collateral I need to give to a prospect to move them forward in our sales process, to what is the collateral that my prospect needs, that's going to help them where they are, we will know exactly what we need to build, and people don't do that very well. So if I'm thinking about a prospect coming in, the only way that I'm going to be able to work that out as a salesperson, the selling organization, is to find out where are they really in understanding or really thinking about this issue, challenge, or opportunity. And if they're really early on, then I need to help educate them and help them build some internal understanding on that, so they can get to a place of consensus. Because of course, it's very rarely them making a decision on their own. They're amongst the decision-making unit. So then I'm like, okay, what I need is to make sure that we have things and collateral that can educate our prospects. And I need to make sure that it's a multimedia format. I need, we've taken a lot through our eyes. So that there needs to be something very visual. I need a combination of a 60-minute, a 60-second video through to a written piece, some images, graphs. I need different versions. And then I also need some bullet points, because some people are like, send me bullet points. That's how I understand things. And then we're going to have people who are really quite far in their understanding of what they need, and what they're trying to solve for. And those people need different information. They don't need to be educated, because they've been doing it for 3 months. They've educated themselves. They've come to you. They've spoken to a lot of providers. So now they're like, I need to know more about you. And that's where we start to leverage things like case studies. It's because we're trying to build this credibility. Think about reverse hangman, right? So we don't die at the end and lose. This time we win, because we're starting to slowly ask questions and build a picture of how capable we are. And that's just bit by bit. And then they have a full picture, and they're like, you are the person or the group of people that's going to help us to meet our desired outcomes. But what you're not going to do is someone says, hey, we're at RFI stage, we've identified you as a potential provider to help us solve for this. And you're like, let's educate them on the problem. And they're like, we have a whole RFI, which is 30 pages long. You do not need to teach us what that problem is. We get it. So it's interesting. If you split it into those kind of buckets, you'll find exactly what you need.
That's fascinating. Reverse hangman. I've never heard that one before. I must say, we're going to take a great, a few good sound bites from this one.
I make stuff up on the spot. That's why.
You made that up on the spot. Reverse hangman.
I was like, this might go down wrong, but
Brilliant
I'm
analogy.
Kind of just saying stuff that comes to my head. So.
One of the things, of course, that's we mentioned it a few times in this chat is obviously the pandemic has led, as we say, to this hybrid or remote working.
Yeah.
Which has required, and you mentioned Zoom, it's required the need to harness technology more, obviously, as you know, not just in sales, but in every facet, every industry, every business unit. But in particular with sales and sales performance and sales coaching, how can technology really impact performance there?
So the biggest thing that everybody wanted to focus on this year, and or not this year, but over the last few years, is productivity. I mean, we hear that every time. I need my team to be as productive as possible. Now, I think that initially came from the fact that they weren't in the office. So, you know, the usual measure was if you're moving around and doing stuff at your desk, you're working.
Yeah.
So to be fair, we probably got away with a lot of not working in the office, because as long as we were seen to be, it was assumed you were doing work. But now technology is leveraged to measure your productivity and roll those numbers up to the top of the organization to say Hannah is being effective or ineffective. So there's no like time out. I'm just going to chill and stand by the water cooler and kind of then go for a smoke, and then I'm going to come back and maybe you go for lunch, and all of a sudden you've kind of lost 2.5 hours of your day because you also went to the gym, because you know your workplace said be healthy is a good part. Now it's like 8 hours a day. I'm hoping 7 hours I can record what you've been doing. So technology has helped provide some level of comfort, but also visibility into what people are doing. Maybe to a degree that isn't always great, but it allows us to organize our business better, to say, what are people doing? What are people not doing? What's not working? Why are they not doing that? Because sometimes it's actually just a gap in our own technology, not people. It's not a people problem. It's the way in which we're set up. And it allows us to get, because we're capturing so many things, we can actually bring more predictability into even just our people processes, our HR processes, etc. Now, the other side of it is it just helping us to do our work better and helping us to meet prospects where they are. So if you think about, you know, chatbots or anything that allows you to capture somebody at the moment they land on your website or in your digital spaces, that's been around for a long time, but the sales use case for that was never really a thing. It was always like a very basic, you know, customer service type thing. Now it's like, I'm going to try and sell to you when you get on the website because you're here. I've got I'm going to capture that audience right now. So it's interesting how it's like in the back end, it's helping us to be more efficient, but then at the front end on the ground, it's helping us to capture as much as we can in the moment when people are with us, because people disappear and they're like, yeah, there's 20 other competitors. I'll just go to their website as well and see who's available because I need answers. So there's a lot of choice now, a lot of choice, and people can do a lot without us as salespeople and as a selling org. So we just got to be there in the moments that matter.
So you mentioned about harnessing technology to perhaps understand or assess productivity of let's say, you know, account executives, sales executives. Yeah. With that being said, could productivity, or at least the assessment of productivity, be viewed by those employees, by those sales executives as perhaps like micromanagement, or even, as you know, you said so yourself, perhaps a distrust from management in terms of monitoring productivity? What do you think about that?
Yeah, it can be completely. There's going to be salespeople that don't understand it, but I think again that's a cultural thing. I think when I'm working with sales teams, I tell them, like, you have to be a data-driven salesperson. You have to know your numbers. I come onto the call and I say, okay, it's our Monday morning meeting. Where are we to date with our targets, with our meetings booked? What meetings are pending? You know, how much pipeline did we drive last week? And it's just like, oh, 1 second, let me check. Let me just check.
Yeah.
And it's like, we should know, like, before these systems, 14 years ago, I had to show up with those. I had to show up with those numbers. Like, what kind of, because it couldn't be tracked. I had to show up with them, and now it can be tracked. People are a bit like, yeah, but they think it's a management thing, and they're not taking advantage of all of that insight that they have, which is like, I'm finding that if I do more of that, that is converting more. I can take that Friday off. I don't even need to be here on Friday, because if I just quickly nail that, because hey, LinkedIn inbox messaging is booking me more meetings, or this channel is helping me get there faster, whatever it is. But there's the smart salespeople who don't want to be making 100 calls a day are all over it. But the ones who see it as just a management and a micromanagement thing are the ones who are like, you know what? Yeah, I'm just going to do whatever I need to do so it shows up properly. It's like, this is a loss. This is a missing opportunity for you.
That's brilliant. And I think you've really, I agree with you 100%. I think you've really nailed it. And I think you've used the term smart salespeople. And that's not, that's nothing to do with intelligence. That's to do with utilizing the resources they have available. So instead, as you say, instead of looking at all the data, looking at all essentially the productivity reports, the number of calls, length of meetings, etc., as a form of, this is, management watching over me, but utilizing it instead for your own benefit. As you say, if I do A, B, C, I'm seeing that it's achieving D, so to speak, and working smarter. And I think that's a brilliant tip to give to salespeople. And in fact, I'll use your term, XDRs would do very well to listen to this podcast, actually, and watch this podcast. And understanding that the data that they have available, the reporting, the management reporting that's available, they should use to their benefit. So I think that's fascinating. That's a great point. You've made that very well indeed. How do you think sales managers and sales leaders can adapt to the sort of ever-changing market conditions to really help their sales team succeed this year?
Yeah, there needs to be a focus on business acumen. There are way too many customer-facing teams, and I always like to bring it away from sales teams. I get really frustrated that the only teams that get trained are salespeople. So it's outrageous. If you are customer-facing and you touch revenue, you should be trained. You should be all trained in the same way. I do not understand why you have to be a quota carrying, like, new business type revenue to get training. I work with CS teams, account managers, XDRs, and the frontline account executives, and train them on the same things. So CS are like, oh wow, didn't right? But it doesn't make sense. Business acumen is massive. You don't have to be an expert, but you really do have to understand how businesses work, how they come to their decision making, how they, the challenges they have, understanding the very, very basic financial metrics, even down to revenue and profit, gross profit. A lot of people don't know that. And we don't train it. I never see this in enablement material. Even in some of the biggest companies in the world, there's just this assumption that if you have been in sales, you can't have that. But remember, sales is a team effort, particularly as you move up market. So, somebody needs to be able to have a fairly decent conversation with the CFO. A fairly decent conversation around, operational efficiencies, a fairly decent conversation around where this line item lands. Is it OPEX or is it CAPEX? Is it like just 5 or 6 things that's going to help them be able to look at the profile of an organization and say, I'm on your website. This is how you make money. And then feel curious about, I wonder what your revenue makeup looks like. Because you going in saying, I'm going to help your sales team be really effective, and then identifying that actually 85% of our revenue comes through partners is lost on that organization, right? So how do we try to train sales leaders? Should be thinking about, how do I get my teams upskilled with just basic business acumen? How do I help them understand the structure of business? How do I help them? How do I nurture curiosity? I was listening to somebody yesterday. I think it's one of the first maybe 10 employees of Flexport. They're in the, I'm going to get this wrong, but I think it's the logistics space. But he was like, when I hired the team and built the team, and they're, multi-billion-dollar organization, at valuation stage, he said, I was just looking for curiosity. I don't care about, he said, it's not that I don't care, but past experience and, you know, the profile on the paper, forget that if they're not curious. If they are curious, then I know that they're going to be trying to figure stuff out. They're going to get creative, right? They're going to be resourceful. They're going to want to learn more. And I sit there, particularly with someone who's got a really big profile online, and I speak with salespeople who are trying to sell to me, and half of them do not know that I do sales training. Most of them have never checked out my profile or seen that I've got so many posts that they can relate to try and get a bit closer to understand like how I think. I'm like, that's because you weren't curious enough to check. You thought that that isn't your responsibility. I've had salespeople say to me, I said, you know, did you get a chance? I give them a bit of, you know, grace. So rather than saying, I can tell that you didn't do any research, I'll say, oh, did you get much time to do any research on Scaled? And they say, that's not my job. When my XDR books in the meeting, they share their notes. So I said, okay, I just left it there. But those are the people right now, sales leaders who are on the front line selling your solutions. They're literally telling prospects, I had no time. And it's not my responsibility to figure out who you are, what you do, and how I can help. I'm just going to go on my XDR who's been in sales for 3 months.
Wow. Yeah. And I've definitely come across people just like that in my career. I'd like to talk a little bit. One of the final questions I just want to sort of pose to you is and I know this is going to be something that a lot of people are going to be thinking about as we move further into 2023, and those decision makers, those CFOs are perhaps reviewing budgets quarterly, monthly, and they're possibly being more cautious about new software that they're looking to purchase. There may be a need for organizations to pivot or repurpose the value proposition of their platform, especially as as I say, as budgets are being tightened and more stringent decisions are being taken about purchases. So what kind of strategies can organizations, can vendors do, can put into place to try, as I say, to repurpose their value proposition of what it is they're selling?
Yeah, I think we need to go back to Andy Raskin celebrating Zuora and talking about it being the best presentation that he's ever seen, and PowerPoint deck. I mean, Google it if you haven't seen it, but there's a lot of literature around it. Essentially, we are in a place now where companies need to be a little bit more provocative with their value proposition. The reason why is because if healthcare had to shift so fast because of the pandemic, you literally have no excuse, because that is the slowest moving industry ever, right? So the whole reason why I mentioned the Zuora thing is because we are living in a different time. Your strategy is no longer 5 years, it's a year, and you're reviewing it every quarter. Yeah. Even the biggest companies in the world are doing that. You cannot be doing the things the same way. You cannot have the same KPIs you had 2 or 3 years ago. You cannot have the same, you can't have the same strategy you had 2 or 3 years ago. So this is a time when companies are, although they're cautious, they're not comfortable doing the same stuff. So where they always had that same provider, they're a bit like, who else could do this? Maybe for cheaper, which is fine, right? Forget the big guys. Who's changing the game? Who can get us there faster? So they're actually in a space where they will experiment. They will look at things in a different way. But we have to be big and bold enough to challenge that thinking and also be confident enough. And we need to arm salespeople with the tools, the dialogue, the frameworks, or scripting. I preferred frameworks to scripts. But that help them have those conversations, that help them reach out and say, hey, there's no way you should be doing what you were doing 2-3 years ago. That is not going to help your business move forward in the way that you need to move, right? Everyone's cautious. They're operating at a lower cost. That's why we're seeing so many layoffs. It's like, oh, we thought it would be like this. It's not. So let's be cautious and let's, wipe out half of our costs or a significant portion of our costs, because we need to move. You can almost see it like a SEAL 6 team, right? Like, they're like, we've just got this tight knit thing, and we're kind of like moving, and we're reacting to what's happening in the industry, in the economy, and we need to make that decision fast and take action and be confident. So not only do you need to extend trust, I'm always going to come back to it. and give employees more responsibility so they can go out and be provocative and do things differently, create materials inside the guidelines, inside the brand guidelines, all those things that can help them be like, this is my voice, I want to echo that. And that's why we're seeing things like people leveraging personal brand. People are being hired because they have a personal brand, because they are provocative, they are polarizing, they challenge things. So we need to now, as we move into this year, and people are, their budgets are tighter and they're a bit cautious, and the decision makers are all over the place, connecting with people on a human level, challenging how they're thinking about doing things, being pretty provocative, saying there's no way you're looking at your business in the same way as you were 3 to 4 years ago. That doesn't make any sense. And just leaning into the fact that people may be open to experimenting a little bit. But if we're not prepared for those conversations, then then we're just going to continue business as usual.
That's brilliant, Hannah. And I've got to say that you've given us a ton of exceptional practical insights, advice and tips that a lot of the viewers and the listeners today will be able to take away. It's certainly stirred my mind a lot. I'm certainly going to take a number of things away. You've really given us some excellent advice there. Hannah, I want to say thank you so much for coming onto the podcast. It has been fascinating listening to you. I wish we had more time, because I think we could speak for hours and hours. Perhaps we can get you on again. It would be amazing to sort of dive deeper into some of the discussion points that you mentioned there. Thank you so much for your time today, Hannah. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on. Really appreciate your time. Hannah Ajikawo, practice lead at Scales Consulting. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.